You're listening to Make the Game with Matt Hackett.
All right. Welcome to Make the Game. My name is Matt Hackett. So, the first episode, thanks for listening, by the way. Thanks for tuning in. The episode about career development and where to find all your career knowledge. It was pretty scripted, and I think I sounded a little bit stiff, which, makes sense. I kind of overthought that one. I've had this podcast in the back of my mind for years, so makes sense. But this one, I'm doing a different way. There's no script. It's this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. I think it has lots of value. I think there's some great takeaways from this, so I hope this is a good chat. But I'm coming in kind of unprepared. I have some note cards, but I've kind of written about this idea. I just haven't published it. So here it is. Saturation in game design. And I think it can be applicable to almost anything, right? Like product design too. But and this might be a term that, other books have covered. I've read a bunch of game design books, but I don't have, classical knowledge. I didn't go to school for game education or anything. So, maybe it exists. Feel free to let me know. This is already a thing and people call it something else. But, you kind of invent your own language. Like Jeff and I, from Lost Cast, we chat all the time and kind of throw terms at each other just to keep our language on the same page. So we're not just repeating, the definitions of those terms. So saturation comes up. And let's talk about this real quick. So saturation as pertains to game design. Picture in your mind a chessboard, right? I think chess is a good... Or checkers if it's simpler, but a game that everybody knows for the most part, we're all pretty familiar with. So I'm going to use chess. An 8x8 board, right? You have a grid, a very simple, straightforward matrix, right? 64 tiles. You have, 16 pieces per player, right? 8 pawns, 8 more complicated pieces. There are rules in chess, such as no more than one piece can occupy any cell at a given time, right? You can't have 2 pawns in the same tile. There's piece behavior, which is how they can move, ranging from very simple, like, a pawn can move one tile forward, and that's it, except for the first move where it can move 2, and then it attacks diagonally. So pawn's pretty complicated, right? Especially when compared to, say, like which one is that? Rook. One of my favorite pieces. If you're not familiar with chess, Rook can move up, down, left, right, as far as they want. Rook is like, if you think about it programmatically, writing the code to support chess. Rook is among one of the simplest ones. If you have a chess game, you have the ability to add and remove pieces to this chess game, right? And chess also has a rule where you can modify the pieces. You can turn a pawn into a queen if your pawn makes it all the way to the other side of the board. So these are pretty much the features that chess has, right? On your turn, you move a piece, and you can choose to move any piece that you want of yours with certain rules. Chess is a little more complicated, like you can't make certain moves if it'll put you in check and things like that. But that's pretty much the entire capability of chess. There's some more complication in there. If you're actually going to be, programming the game, you're going to need things like animation and yada yada, right? But like, it's not like a turn-based strategy RPG where each piece has a lot of state, and complication. Chess is a really simple game. So let's get into saturation here. I really love looking at a design in this way so for saturation, you want to look and see what all capabilities the game design has, as we've discussed with chess. Then you want to look at it and see what all can it already do that it's not taking advantage of. Right? So this is not adding new features or capabilities to the engine. This is looking at the things that it can do today and seeing if they are leveraged. And you can almost picture like a spreadsheet. You could make one. I've done this before, for some of my games. I'd make a spreadsheet and then you talk about it, you list out features under the columns. And for this might be like, piece type, board size. You could have, why couldn't you have a 10 by 10 board in chess? You totally could. Stuff like that. So when we look at this list here, one thing we can see is that pieces are added at the beginning of the game, pieces are removed throughout the game, and pieces very seldomly are modified, like in the case with the pawn upgrading to the queen. So, chess is a perfect game. probably shouldn't be messed with too much. Although some indies and others have messed with the design. What is the one? Battle chess or there's some pretty crazy ones out there. I'll put some in the show notes if I can. I think I'm making a little note here. Cool chess games. I should play some too. But like, if you want to make your own game, it's really useful to look at this. So chess doesn't really add pieces, right? And in a lot of my favorite strategy RPGs, pieces are added all the time, right? Like a monster spawn. There might be a wizard that summons a dragon. You might create a firewall, that stays in the world and damages your enemy. You're adding new entities to your simulation. It's one way of looking at it, right? For the chessboard, it would be adding pieces to your board. But, in default chess, there's no way to like create a new pawn, even though you might want one. So that's kind of what saturation is about, is looking at a design, seeing what it does and seeing what it could do and listing that stuff out. Some of my favorite examples of saturation are a double jump. Double jump is a great example because, if you're playing a platformer game, it's probably got to jump, right? And for most of the games, the default starting point is you can jump. But for some games, you begin with a double jump. Some games you can get an upgradable double jump, which is my preference. Some games you can just straight up fly forever. Some games you get a jetpack, but those are all, for the most part, variations of the exact same mechanic, just the jump. Programmatically, if you were coding up the support for that in a platformer, you can totally imagine how you might have like a jump count. Jump count equals 1. That's how it starts, right? And you got the double jump upgrade. Now jump count equals 2. And then, for a jetpack, now your jump count is, infinity. And there's a whole other system tacked on. Perhaps your jetpack has like gas, like a resource, so it can only be used a limited amount, or maybe you can just fly forever. The game, I think it's just pronounced V, but the V, that classic Atari-looking platformer. So you reverse the gravity in that one, which to me is another great example of saturation, because in just about any platformer, you could flip the gravity. And they all these platformers we play do this already. You know what I mean? Like they're maybe the code isn't set up in all of them. You could ask a senior programmer on that project to be like, hey, can we flip the gravity? They might, no, that's so hard. There's always some systems that get tied up, and sometimes a decision that was made early on prevent you from easily making tweaks. But other times, like in a lot of the games I've worked on, it is literally like a property. You could just smack onto an individual entity to be like, hey, my gravity is flipped. Or even, right? You could have a global gravity amount, which is like, hey, it's 1 by normal, and by default, it shoves you down. Switch it to -1, you go flying up in the air. So those are examples of saturation to me. So let's talk about the benefits, because that's one of the things this podcast is about, right? For you Lostcast listeners, Jeff and I, just some fun chat times. I didn't always know where it was going. This time, I'm here to deliver you the benefits. I will try not to bring stuff up unless I think that it can help you make games. So let's talk about that. So why do I like saturation? It's been kind of hard to like formulate it. I was gonna blog about it. I have a draft written and everything. But why do I like it so much? Why has it been on my mind? So saturation can find you some unexpected hooks, which, if you're not familiar, a hook is what makes your game stand out. It's kind of really important in the crowded marketplace today if you're interested in selling your game. One of my favorite examples of what I think is kind of a saturation exploration that resulted in an interesting hook is a game I'm going to be talking about a lot. So you better, if you don't know it, you should at least go watch a trailer for it. It's Into the Breach. This is by Subset Games, who also made... I almost said FML. No, FTL. FTL, the classic kind of like, space battle exploration game, which is really good. Into the Breach, though, is kind of in my wheelhouse because next I'm going to be talking about Shining Force, as I do. But strategy RPG type of gameplay. Into the Breach plays a lot like chess, actually. Like the boards are actually 8x8, and you have a small number of units. It's not one of these giant, there aren't 100 units to worry about. So I will post a link to this if I can find it. But Subset Games, look them up sometime. Watch their talks. Woo, I'll put some links in there. They are good. I'll put a link to the talk if I can find it specifically. But they were talking about they spent years in the exploration phase trying to like find what was fun about their turn-based tactics prototype, right? And they had a bunch of different enemy units they were playing with, and one of them, just the one, right? They didn't bake this into the whole design. One of them would telegraph what it was going to do the next turn. You could see, oh, hey, that insect is going to, knock that building down. I'd better prevent that now. And the other insects, I guess, didn't have that. And I'm sure they had behaviors they were going to do, but it wasn't, brought up to the player and shown to you with user interface and stuff. So they put that in the game and they loved it. And then they smartly saw how good it was and doubled down on that. And now that's the whole game's premise, pretty much. That's one of the things that makes the game so good. It's one of those games where you stare at your board for, like, I will sometimes stare at it for 15, 20 minutes. And, I'm moving pieces around a little bit and trying to see what might work. But you can see what the enemy's going to do. And sometimes it's so agonizing because you just like, oh, I can stop that one and that one. But then that third one is going to get that building. It's so good. And like most of the goodness from that game comes around that core thing, which is that one of the enemies telegraphed. And so they were like, let's make them all do that. And with saturation, you could look at that too as with the gravity stuff, right? Like, so in Spelunky, I'm going to be talking about Spelunky all the time. Get ready. There are some enemies who reverse their own gravity, right? So, they like that could be how the core mechanic for V was discovered. So, that's one of the benefits it gives you is it can find cool hooks for you that set your game apart. Another one is provide new content, right? Like subset designers could have had that one enemy and decided that would make a cool boss feature, right? As they're kind of saturating their design and seeing what all it's capable of doing and trying to remix those capabilities into something cool. They could have landed on a boss, and then Spelunky, the example is the gravity. It says there's a couple different enemies that use that. What's nice about saturation too is that a lot of times involves low-hanging fruit. Right, which like I think if you're indie like me, especially if you're solo dev like me, the low-hanging fruit's really important, especially when it's like, whoa, my engine already does this, right? So like I'm just gonna create the content now, and a lot of times you don't know, like, oh, I need some new monsters or a new puzzle, and you don't know what to build, right? But if you explore the saturation, you could see some things that just kind of reveals itself to you. It's like you're an archaeologist uncovering a little bone. Oh, cool. And then it gives you a whole thing you can explore and discover the whole skeleton. Here's a cool one is sometimes there are features you're not aware of that your game does that you don't really think of as saturation properties that you could change. So here's an example is let's say you have like a roguelike or any game, but there's a monster coming after you, right? Pretty standard thing. They start pathing towards you or just chasing you, whatever. You might not look at that as like there's a bunch of opportunity there to flip a switch or something, but there totally is. One of my favorite things is when you have, say, like your AI has a team. So instead of specifically being like, my AI is I look for the player and I chase the player and I punch the player in the face. It's more, I have a team and the player is on that team and I hate that team. But then you could say cast a spell on the enemy and switch its team, and now your enemy goes and fights for you. Like, how cool is that, right? And this is not a new concept. Like the Doom games did this. You could get monsters to fight against each other. The original Rogue did this, I'm sure. But, sometimes we forget, and like it's really easy to see, let's say you've got a hit point bar or a health bar on one of your units in your game. You can easily see like, oh, well, there's some saturation. I could have an enemy with no health, an enemy with 1 health, an enemy with 100 health, and an enemy with infinite health. You can just totally saturate that feature. Other ways to saturate health. You could have damage over time, healing over time, a shield component that blocks the damage before it hits your health. All kinds of ways to saturate that. All kinds of cool ways you could find new game designs in your game design. So, okay, this last bit, before I start to finish up, I want to talk about Shining Force because it's one of my top 3 favorite games of all time. Means a lot to me. It's a lot like chess, honestly, right? Like if you had a chess game engine and you wanted to make Shining Force, you totally could. You'd have to do a lot of work around, like, RPG mechanics and whatnot, health, hit points, roll some dice under the hood, that kind of a thing. But so I'm sure we've talked about this on other podcasts before, like Lostcast, but Jeff and I have lamented before about how, like, Shining Force is a game that it wasn't thoroughly saturated, right? Like, none of your units could really do anything that special. They all had the real easy, low-hanging fruit things of, like, well, this one can fly over mountains, and this one can move 1 extra tile, and that one has a fire spell, which is exactly like the ice spell. A bunch of uninteresting things like that. And, we lamented how, like, man, why didn't those games have, like, I want to be able to put down an ice wall that stays there for 3 tiles, or I want to be able to, like, hit an enemy and it gets knocked back 2 tiles and it knocks it into the water and it dies. And, the ability to manipulate the world and to have cooler abilities than just, like, a spell that does the same thing or has a bigger radius, And I had a thought which kind of explains to me why they didn't do this, perhaps. For one, limitations back then on the Sega Genesis were probably unbelievable. But Shining Force is a game that is it's a role-playing game. It's kind of a JRPG, strategy RPG type of thing. You have, like, base 10 hit points or so. You start with around 10 hit points. You end up with maybe a maximum of, like, 100 or so. The maps are all hand curated. There's 8 chapters, and, like, each map is really just like a big, here's your enemies and go fight them. But there are lots of triggers and cut events where, like, once you walk past a certain point in the map, some new monsters will spawn, or when you reach a certain place, an earthquake will happen and cut off your access to going to the left, or something like that happens once in a while, right? And the thing is when we think about, like, I feel like I live a lot of my life at the intersection between programming and design. And so a lot of times the design that I want is, like, pushed back on by the programming that is capable. And in this case of Shining Force, if you could put down a tile that didn't let a monster walk a certain way or something, or if you had an attack that pushed back a boss in 2 tiles and knocked them somewhere that the game didn't expect them to be. I mean, when you think about the repercussions of the bugs, the crashes, the Q&A nightmares, then you kind of start to understand why certain things probably weren't done. I wasn't there, I didn't work on these games, but with a career built around games now, I can't help but look at things with these certain lights where I kind of understand, like, okay. And I think the lesson there, though, like, looking for benefits again, the thought that this leads to is that when you're exploring saturation, you'll find some cool stuff, and I hope you'll find some cool hooks and some things you want to keep in your game, at least, if not your whole hook for your game, then at least some cool content. But the thing is not everything needs to be used, right? I think it's okay when you're exploring saturation is you find, like, whoa, I can zoom out to where everything's the size of 1 pixel. That's kind of cool. That's a saturation thing. Your camera zoom level. Like, I can zoom all the way in to where you can't see anything. Yeah, maybe don't need those. You could zoom in and out. You could zoom in, to ooh, look at this door. You could zoom out to be like, oh, look at this. Look at all these pretty graphics I made. But you maybe don't, have to use it all the time. You maybe don't have to be all the way zoomed in. So that's just one example. Not everything needs to be used, but I'll say this. I think it's good to know about those things that are out there, right? So if you're working on a game and you haven't done this where you kind of go through the practice of saturating it, do it. Check it out. Like, on graph paper, write out all your features, write out all of your, like, content capabilities, what your enemies can do and what your puzzles are capable of or whatever. Create a little spreadsheet or something and see, put an X, like, okay, it does this. And then, like, oh, it doesn't do this. Or, like, hey, here's a number, which is, how high this monster jumps. Has that been a 2 yet? Has that been doubled, tripled? Has it been removed? Those kinds of things. I think that they will help you. I think saturation will reveal some cool stuff about your games. That is it for this episode. You are being played out by Monster Stomp. Okay, I want to talk about this a little bit, real quick. You may have noticed I'm putting songs at the ends of these episodes that you can use. Again, with the trying to deliver you real game dev value. Get that value. You can use this song in your game, in your project, or whatever. This is kind of a practice too. So in my book, How to Make a Video Game All by Yourself, look at that effortless marketing. Isn't it great? In my book, I talk about licenses, especially Creative Commons licenses. And, I'm an advocate of making your own stuff. I like making my own graphics for my games, but, doing everything is just too much, right? So part of this kind of creating this music, creating this podcast and having this music at the end is going to be a practice for me too. And I'll share my experiences with you. But the public domain and Creative Commons stuff is a little interesting because you have to adhere to the license. I'll link to this license and you should check it out. I'll link to it because I want to, but also because I have to. So check this out. The licensor cannot revoke these freedoms as long as you follow the license terms, right? So you get so much good value out of using a public domain or an available song, but you also have to be careful. It can burn you. If I didn't follow these licensor agreements, I could get an email in a month or two that's like, hey, you got to take your podcast down, or you have to spend a bunch of your time, like say goodbye to your afternoon, you have to edit this, or it's going to get taken down by tomorrow. That's kind of worst case scenario, right? But I'm just saying, like, if you make something yourself and put it out there, you only have to worry about yourself. But if you use someone else's stuff, you need to be respectful. So I'll put my learnings here. I'm fairly new to using these assets myself. So, if I need to edit an episode or if I did a license incorrectly or something, you'll be the first to know. But I think it's pretty cool that, if you're listening to this song and you're digging it and you keep listening after the show, throw it in your game, whatever, right? For this one, I need to say it's from Techno Axe's royalty-free music. And I need to tell you, it's been adapted a little bit. And not every license lets you do this, so look out for that. But I'm going to fade it in and out probably, and I'm probably going to talk over it a little bit. And, those are things to be aware of, is that technically that's kind of a remix or a transformation, because sometimes it has to be, this recording as intended, just like this, and no other, usage is acceptable. So anyway, that one's more long-winded than most of the You're Getting Played Out is going to be. But my goal is at the end of every episode to have a song you can use. And maybe you have to, include a few words in your project or something to let you do that. But I think that's pretty cool. I love music and I love creativity and using stuff in your projects. And why not, man? So anyway, that's it. I hope this episode was a little bit less stiff. Hope it was more natural. I love these cue cards. If that works, I might keep doing this. And yeah, future episodes are coming. So be sure to subscribe and all that jazz. Now it's time for you to go make the game. I always sit and I'm trying to stand and I'm throwing myself a curveball. Don't do too much. Do less.